Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. What a perfect day for this event. Thank you all for being here. So I am Sarah Osborne. I am the education person at the Parkinson's Foundation. And I want to introduce my coworkers, Caitlin Duke, Kayla Gruen, and Helena Fox, who are here today. Thank you for being here. Everyone knows Helena. I want to really thank you guys and the care partners and the community partners, community members joining us today. We really appreciate you and thank you for coming. I also want to thank the Oakland Spiritual Center. They have been a wonderful, amazing host. They've provided this beautiful space for us, so thank you so much, Susan and Helene and Peggy and the whole team. And I'd especially like to thank PD Active for being such an incredible, amazing partner for today's event, and Dr. Ray Dorsey and Dr. Jana Reed for their time today. So next slide, please. A little bit about the Parkinson's Foundation. Our mission is to make lives better for people living with Parkinson's today until there's a tomorrow without the disease. And the way that we do that is by investing in care, education, and advocacy, and advancing research. Next slide. So some of you may have seen our resources or be familiar with our resources. They're all free, and you can find them at our website, parkinson.org, and that includes our book series, our webinars, our podcasts, hospital safety guide, newly diagnosed guide. And we also have a toll-free helpline. It's 1-800-4PD-INFO, and they're staffed by professionals. It's a really great resource. Next slide. And with that, just a few housekeeping items to share. If you're able to silence your phones, if you could just take one quick moment to do that. Reminder that the restrooms are up front by the entrance where you came in. The center is recording this event. So just so you all know, I don't believe any of you will be in the recording. If you stand up, you might appear for a quick second. And within a few weeks, we will have that on the Parkinson's Foundation website and the PD Active website. And then as far as questions, we do encourage you to submit your questions at any point through the program. You have index cards at your seat. If you can just write down your question and hand them to myself or Todd, who you will meet here in a moment, we will then have a moderated Q&A segment after the presentation. And with that, I'd like to introduce Todd Morrish from PD Active.
Good job. Hello, hello. Good afternoon. I thank all the same people that Sarah thanks. Thanks for the Spiritual Center. Thanks for all your help. And AV team, a shout out to you guys. Thank you. So my name is Todd Morrish, and I am the president of the board of directors for PD Active. So I'll give you a woo. All right, well, let's start with that. Show of hands of PD Active members here in the audience. Very nice. Awesome. Okay. Well, while I'm doing that, let's have the board of directors. How many of our board of directors for PD Active are here? If you could just stand up and raise your hand. 2 seconds. There's Judy, there's Suzanne. There we are. Now you know who to ask questions of if you have any questions. So let's go, my first slide, next slide, thank you. So who is PD Active? Well, we're a community-based nonprofit organization based in Berkeley, about 15 years old, I do believe. I need to do my history on the history of my homework on the history of PD Active, but it's been about, the organization has been around for about 15 years. We are buying for people that are impacted by Parkinson's. So we have lots of caregivers here in the audience. We have lots of people with shaky left hands. It's funny, you know, because when you're a PWP, a person with Parkinson's, you get to know what your functional limitations are, don't you? This is not my mic hand. This is probably my mic hand, right? This is not my notes hand. It's my toothbrushing hand. Haha. So we offer our programming completely free on an event by event basis. We do subsist on donations, whether annual or otherwise, or recurring memberships. We're rooted in lived experience, inclusion, and support, and our mission is to help people with Parkinson's stay active, informed, and connected. Next slide, thanks. So the programming that we offer comes in 3 sort of pillars, if you will. One focusing on movement, the other on community, and the third on education, the three legs of the stool, if you will. And you know how those three-legged stools, if you take one of those legs away, then eventually that stool's going to fall over. So we like to focus equally on all three of those. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll show just some more detail under each of those pillars. These are all partial lists here, so you get an idea of the extent of the program. I'm not going to read each of them, but you can see that we've got a whole lot of different classes and activities that folks are able to do. Support groups, about 11 different support groups serving different types of folks with Parkinson's or their loved ones. And the education pillar is the events that Monique and I co-chair, like this one. Also, we do speaker forums in Berkeley and Oakland at various different locations, and roundtables. And we've done 20 and 23 of each of those since the COVID outbreak. So we're still staying busy, and we do a lot of those virtually. So you'll find those on our calendar on pediactive.org. And that's it. This is how you find us and track us down. We're not hard to find. And now, let's go to the next slide. I think my next task is to introduce our next speaker. This is a series of 3 introductions, and she will have the honor of introducing our primary speaker in a few moments here. But it is my great honor to introduce to you a good friend of Pediactive and Parkinson's Foundation, Dr. Jana Reed. Born and raised in San Luis Obispo, California, Dr. Reed left for 23 years and considers herself lucky to have returned home. Graduated from U.S. Air Force Academy in '95, she ran track and field as a hurdler and jumper. Then she went on to pursue a medical degree from Georgetown. During her active duty career, Dr. Reed was stationed at 8 different military bases across the U.S. and abroad. 8. Wow. And she has served her country in some capacity affiliated with the Air Force for over 33 years. Regarding her PD journey, if you haven't read The Parkinson's Plan, shame on you. You didn't know there was homework, did you? Well, then that's just one more reason why you should. If you have read it, then you know her journey there starts not just in chapter 1, but in the introduction, on page 1, on sentence 1. So meaningful and pertinent was her story to Dr. Dorsey's. So without further fanfare, please join me in thanking her for her service, Dr. Jana Reed. Go get him.
Thank you. I have a shaky leg, so that's what you'll see with me. But, it's nice to be here, and I just want to tell a quick story about Dr. Dorsey before I officially recognize him, but he's such a good communicator. I live in San Luis Obispo. I see a neuromovement disorder doctor at Stanford, and Dr. Poston, and she happened to mention to me, we were talking about my deployments and kind of some of the toxic exposures I could have been, that I could have come against overseas. And she told me to get in touch with Dr. Dorsey. And so I emailed him, and we emailed back and forth a couple times over the next 2 years. Well, without me knowing, he was also, he had been introduced to my girlfriend, Sarah, who's the other physician in the book. So we kind of go hand in hand. Sarah is another Air Force Academy graduate with me. We ran track and field together, 2 girls, Afghanistan at the same time, and we were diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's within the same month of each other. So, but she had met Ray, and so Ray emailed both of us and said, Sarah, Jana, you guys need to meet. And he didn't know that we were already good friends. It was really cool, but anyway, very good organizer of people, so thanks. Anyway, so I want to introduce Dr. Dorsey, who really doesn't need an introduction, but he's a neurologist, a researcher, and a public health advocate. He's working to end Parkinson's disease by addressing its root causes, which is toxic environmental exposures. He is the founding director of the Center for the Brain and Environment at Atria Health and Research Institute, and he serves as a professor. He has served as a professor of neurology at Rochester, and you're in New York now as well, correct? Yeah. Dr. Dorsey has testified before Congress, and he has advised the World Health Organization and he's been recognized by the White House as a true champion for change. He's the co-author of Ending Parkinson's Disease, which is the first book before this one in 2020, and then obviously the Parkinson's Plan, which is what hopefully you guys will all read soon. And without further ado, Dr. Dorsey.
You're amazing. Thank you. Thank you very much for the, can you hear me? Oh, yes, now, wow. Thank you very much, Gianna. Thank you very much, Todd. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much, Monique. Thank you very much for having me come here today. I was reading PD Active. It's for and by people with Parkinson's disease. Is that the right thing? So what happens if there were people who just did not have Parkinson's disease? And so humans have been around for about 300,000 years, Homo sapiens. I think for 299,800 years, there were largely no humans with Parkinson's disease. For 99.9% of human history, there were just people, almost none of them, with Parkinson's disease. I don't just think that. It turns out Dr. Parkinson, when he described the condition in 1817, he was 61. He sees 6 people with this strange illness on the streets of London, 3 of whom he just casually observed walking on the streets, didn't even examine them. And he said, this disease with the stoop posture, shuffling gait, and shaking hand, this has not been described in the medical literature. This is a new disease to him. And I think, as we are in our first book and the second book, that Parkinson's disease is largely a man-made disease. As we will discuss, the principal causes of the disease are not inside of us. They're not in our DNA. They are outside of us in our environment. Chemicals that are contaminating our food, our water, and our air. And if we didn't have these chemicals contaminating our food, our water, and air, we would largely not have Parkinson's disease. We would just have people. Next slide. So, as Dr. Reed indicated, my colleague Dr. Michael Oken and I wrote the second book, the Parkinson's Plan, and we were often asked why did we write a second book. And we wrote it because Parkinson's disease went from a disease affecting 6 people on the streets of London in 1817 to one affecting over 6 million people 2 centuries later. And according to the Global Burden of Disease study, affecting nearly 12 million people in 2021. How do you go from a disease affecting 6 people to one affecting 12 million in the span of just 200 years? It can't be genes, because our genes don't change that much in just the span of 200 years. It can't be aging, because it's growing much faster than aging alone and far, far faster than other age-related diseases like stroke and Alzheimer's disease. The reason, and I'll give you evidence, is that there are chemicals that are in our food, water, and air that are causing people to have unnecessary, avoidable, and preventable suffering. And if we find out what the right causes of disease are, we can cure. How many people are looking for a cure? So the prerequisite to getting a cure for a disease is you must first identify its cause. In fact, I can't think of a disease that we can cure where we don't know its cause. Second, how many people would like to slow their rate of progression of the disease? And so we're going to give you 25 suggestions today before you leave. If you want to jump ahead to page 237 of the book, you'll get 25 suggestions on how to possibly slow the rate of progression. And how many would like to make sure that their kids and grandkids never get this disease? And so we'll give you recommendations for them as well. Can you go back just one slide? And so the book's called The Parkinson's Plan because it's actually a plan. It says, 1, to prevent the disease, 2, learn why the disease begins so we can cure it, slow it, and prevent it. 3, to amplify the voices of those affected. The fate of diseases are largely in the hands of people who are most directly affected. When people who are most directly affected with a disease make their voices heard, the course of those diseases are changed. They are not changed by doctors. They are changed by people who are most directly affected by the disease, and I'll give you a couple examples. And then in chapters 8 and 9 of the book, Michael Oken tells you about the most promising treatments, and he tells you how you can navigate the frontier of promising treatments in the near, middle, and long term. Next slide. So when I was in medical school, I was taught that Parkinson's was due to aging, due to genetics, maybe a word about pesticides, and largely bad luck. And I think almost all of that is wrong. And so Parkinson's is related to aging, and longevity is a prerequisite to developing Parkinson's disease. If humans all died before age 40, very, very, very few humans would develop Parkinson's because it takes years for the disease to develop. And indeed, if you look at the number of new cases of Parkinson's disease, it's extraordinarily rare before age 30, and then it triples every decade thereafter. These are data from the United Kingdom, and you can see that the incidence or number of new cases of Parkinson's disease triples every decade. In most parts of the world, but not all parts, it's more common in men than women. So this is what you've been told. This is not news to you. But another disease looks virtually identical to that, and that's the next slide. And that's lung cancer. So is lung cancer a disease of aging? No. Lung cancer is a disease principally caused by smoking. Indeed, in 1900 in Oakland, there was almost no lung cancer. Almost no lung cancer in 1900 in Oakland. According to research by Dr. Robert Proctor, a professor of history at Stanford University, lung cancer was so rare it was considered a once-in-a-lifetime oddity by doctors. When doctors saw a case of lung cancer, they and the medical students would all gather around thinking that they would never see another case. Unfortunately, they were wrong, because 25 years after cigarettes were introduced into the United States around 1900, you saw a corresponding rise in lung cancer. And after Americans, Californians, stopped smoking in the 1970s, you saw 25 years later a corresponding decrease in the incidence of lung cancer. So lung cancer is largely a man-made disease. Even today, 80 to 90% of lung cancer is due to smoking. And you can see that more men are affected than women, and this again data from the United Kingdom, because in most parts of the world, more men smoke cigarettes than women. And I'm going to argue too that just why more men smoke cigarettes, more men in many parts of the world are farmers. In the United States, 75% of farmers are men. 97% of pesticide applicators are men, so men are more likely to be exposed to many of the chemicals tied to Parkinson's disease, principally through their occupation. So lung cancer is clearly a man-made disease, largely didn't exist around humanity until the last 100 and 150 years. Parkinson's disease, largely a man-made disease that largely did not exist for the last 200 years. Diseases are not permanent fixtures of the human condition. Diseases come and go. We've seen that time and time again. We live in a world largely free of polio. We live in a world where no one's dying of typhus, which affected President George Washington. Few people are dying of yellow fever. No one's dying of smallpox. Very few people are dying of cancer of the scrotum. These are all diseases that have affected humans in the past, and we've gotten rid of these diseases. And so our challenge here today is to say goodbye to Parkinson's disease after 200 years, and we give you a plan to do exactly that. Next slide. So what about genes? So there's an outstanding study being led by the Parkinson's Foundation. I think they have material on PD generation right outside. How many of you participate in this study? So a lot of you participate in the study. It offers free genetic counseling and genetic testing to anyone in the U.S. with Parkinson's disease, and it's also available to people outside the United States. It's a landmark study. Its results were published in 2024 in one of the top neurology journals called Brain, and they looked at the genetic testing results for the first 8,000 participants with it, and they had a simple question: what portion of these 8,000 individuals with Parkinson's disease, largely Americans, what proportion carry a genetic cause or genetic risk factor? And the answer is about 13%. About 13% of people, Americans, carry a genetic cause or genetic risk factor. Most of you know that the most common genetic cause of Parkinson's disease is a mutation in a gene called LRRK2, And most of you know, if you have that LRRK2 mutation, your lifetime risk of getting Parkinson's is somewhere on the order of 30 to 40%. And about 8% of people carry mutations in a gene called GBA. I just met a gentleman walking in who carries this genetic mutation, and that your lifetime risk of developing disease is about 10%. Now, if you flip it around, that means 87% of Americans carry no known genetic cause or genetic risk factor of disease. The vast majority of people in this room with Parkinson's disease have no known genetic cause or risk factor disease. Has nothing to do with any known genetic cause or risk factor disease. The principal cause of Parkinson's disease is not in your DNA, it's not inside of you, it's outside of you in your environment, and it's outside of your environment here in Oakland, California, it's outside of your environment in Central Valley of California, it's outside your environment at over half the military bases where Dr. Jana Reed served. Next slide. So what are these environmental chemicals? There are three major ones there, and it varies by geography, and this is not an exhaustive list, but these are the three biggest ones that I think are important to people, to those with Parkinson's disease, especially in the United States. One is certain pesticides. How many know about paraquat? So paraquat is a weed killer widely sprayed on corn and cotton fields and soybeans. It's been used since the 1960s. It's so toxic it's been used to commit homicide and suicide. Research done by Dr. Caroline Tanner, literally across the bay from here in 2011, showed that farmers who work with paraquat have a 150% increased risk of developing the disease. Research done by Dr. Beata Ritz, about 400 miles south on the 5 freeway at UCLA, showed that people who simply live or work near where paraquat is sprayed, they're not spraying it, they're not a farmer, they simply live or work near where paraquat is sprayed, have a doubling of their risk of Parkinson's disease. In the laboratory, paraquat reproduces the features of Parkinson's disease, including tremors of paws of animals. Over 50 countries have banned paraquat, but the United States has not. It's widely sprayed, as I'll show you, in the Central Valley of California, where the rates of Parkinson's disease are among the highest in the entire country. There are other pesticides that are linked to Parkinson's disease. How many have heard about this pesticide called chlorpyrifos? Not many. How many people like to play golf? How many people saw the study that showed that living near a golf course is associated with a 126% increased risk of Parkinson's? So golf courses use up to about 5 times as much pesticide per acre as do farms. One of the pesticides widely sprayed on golf courses is a pesticide called chlorpyrifos. It's estimated to have cost 26 million children 16 million IQ points in the United States alone. In 2021, the EPA banned chlorpyrifos, but its manufacturer successfully sued to overturn that ban. Chlorpyrifos is still sprayed on apple orchards and on golf courses in the United States, depending on the state. Trichloroethylene, perchloroethylene. So this is crazy. So trichloroethylene, I carry around with me, a little high school chemistry. Many of you remember water is made up of 3 atoms, H2O. Yes, we got that, right? We're good. So trichloroethylene is made up of 6 atoms. This is what trichloroethylene looks like. It's got 2 carbon atoms in black, 1 hydrogen in white, and 3 chlorine atoms in blue, hence its name trichloroethylene. It's got a dry cleaning cousin called perchloroethylene, or sometimes tetrachloroethylene, because it's got a 4th additional chlorine atom. Why do I care about this molecule? I didn't care about this molecule until about 2018, when Dr. Tanner said, "Ray, do you know about trichloroethylene?" And I'm like, missed it. No. And so she says, "Well, Ray, we did research showing that people who have hobby or occupational exposure to trichloroethylene have a 500% increased risk of developing Parkinson's disease." 500% increased risk. Marines who served at the Marine base Camp Lejeune. Do you guys know about Camp Lejeune? So Camp Lejeune's a big Marine base in North Carolina. Some of you know Camp Pendleton's in Los Angeles. So if you're Marine, those are the 2 principal places that you do your training. The drinking water at Camp Lejeune from 1953 to 1987 was contaminated with trichloroethylene. According to the EPA, this causes cancer by all routes of exposure. So this is known to cause cancer. Marines who served at Camp Lejeune had a higher rate of cancer. And Dr. Tanner and Dr. Sam Goldman, also at UCSF, showed that Marines who served at Camp Lejeune, if you're a Marine, you're almost by definition healthy. You're almost by definition young. The average age was 20. Some were teenagers. Yet 34 years later, they had a 70% higher risk of developing Parkinson's disease than Marines who served at Camp Pendleton. So you're saying, well, that's just the Marine Corps. What does that have to do with me? It turns out that you don't have to have worked with the chemical or necessarily drink the contaminated water to be exposed. Almost all of us were exposed to this. In 1970, 500 million pounds of trichloroethylene, 2 pounds per American, were produced. It was used to decaffeinate coffee. Anyone drink decaffeinated coffee? People clean carpets, clean carpets, clean guns, typewriter correction fluid, all with trichloroethylene. And so almost all of us have been exposed to it, and so the chemical's been around since the 1920s, so it's been causing cancer for 100 years, and I think likely contributing to Parkinson's disease. And then the last one is outdoor air pollution. Many of you know that when you see smog, everyone here has seen smog, although air quality is pretty good today, which is a marker of what we can do to improve our environment. We've done this before, but on a bad day, you're seeing little pieces of dirt and soot that are suspended in the air. Scientists call that particulate matter. Most of that matter we cough out or sneeze out, but some is so small that it penetrates the nerve responsible for smell hanging up in our upper nasal passages. And there are some hitchhikers on those pieces of dirt and soot. And they're not, those hitchhikers include lead from leaded gasoline, iron from brakes, and platinum from catalytic converters. And these metals and this particulate matter can likely lead to misfolding of a protein called alpha-synuclein that begins in the smell center of our brain, the olfactory bulb, and then from there can spread to the parts of the brain that are responsible for the slowness and the tremor that are associated with Parkinson's disease. And increasing research links air pollution to Parkinson's and even more to dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Next slide. So I'll tell you a little bit more about each of these. So this is where paraquat is sprayed. So while China has banned paraquat, while England has banned it for use in England, but exports it to Brazil, Mexico, and the United States, we are using paraquat in increasing amounts. And it's sprayed on cornfields, soybeans, cotton, and vineyards. I used to live in Rochester, New York. I visited a vineyard 20 to 30 minutes from where I lived in Rochester, New York, that was spraying paraquat on the vineyards in Western New York. And as I indicated, it's sprayed, among the places it's sprayed most heavily is in the Central Valley of California. As you can see on the map on the left, and on the map, on the figure on the right, you can see that paraquat use is not decreasing or not being eliminated, but actually increasing. According to data from the U.S. Geological Survey, use of paraquat in the United States has doubled over the last 5 years, for which data are available. Next slide. So this is trichloroethylene. So it's been used to dry clean clothes. It's been used to degrease metal. And as I mentioned, it's been used to decaffeinate coffee. Next slide. This is the long list of occupations that are associated with it. In 1970, it's estimated that 10 million Americans worked with the chemical. In England, it's estimated 1 in 12 workers worked with trichloroethylene. So if you worked in the aircraft or jet engine mechanic, if you worked as an automobile worker, computer specialist, dry cleaner, embalmer, painter or printer, weapons specialist or varnish worker, you were possibly exposed to the chemical. And if you had these exposures, I'd love to hear your stories, because that's how we use your stories to communicate the science. And then a wide range of commercial and consumer uses that I highlighted earlier, from decaffeinating coffee, glue, gun cleaners, carpet cleaners, paint and paint removers, typewriter correction fluids, and wood finishes. And then a wide number of industrial and military uses. Next slide. So it turns out that over half of Superfund sites in the United States are contaminated with trichloroethylene. Superfund sites, as I think most of you know, are among the most toxic sites in the country, about 1,200 that are designated by the federal government for cleanup. You can see that there are 15 of them in the Silicon Valley because TCE was widely used to clean off silicon wafers. And there are, I think, 11 Superfund sites along a 7-mile stretch of the 101 freeway, 20 miles south from where we're sitting right now. Next slide. And there are thousands of these sites throughout the country, including here in Oakland. So do people know about McClymonds High School? Yes. Do people know it's contaminated? Does anyone know it's contaminated? Wow. So all you have to do to find this is you type in Oakland plus trichloroethylene and you find this. And so, wow. How far is this from here? How far? 10 miles? So in the 1990s, West Oakland contained many metal plating, dry cleaning industrial facilities that used trichloroethylene. So it's the world's best degreaser. I'm a neurologist. I'm not hanging out with degreasing, but I am told it melts away the grease. Some of you remember working on car engines, you'd spray something on the car engine and the grease would melt away? Yes? Likely trichloroethylene. So that was going on from the 1990s. In 2017, a 17-year-old high school student at this high school, McClymonds, dies of leukemia. Trichloroethylene, I told you, causes cancer. It's been linked among the cancers it's been linked to is leukemia. Any attorneys in the room? So people know the book of Civil Action. So a civil action was a town north of Boston called Woburn, Massachusetts, was contaminated with trichloroethylene. Children developed leukemia there. Ms. Ann Anderson took her son Johnny to Boston Children's Hospital. She goes, Doc, it's not Johnny who just has leukemia, but Mary and Susie up the street have leukemia. Could this have something to do with the foul-smelling water in our community? The doctor says no. The mom is right. And the civil action talks about all these children developing leukemia in north of Boston, in a town called Woburn, Massachusetts. Some people know about Toms River, New Jersey, contaminated with trichloroethylene, children getting leukemia. Camp Lejeune actually became public because a Marine drill instructor who served in the Marine Corps for 24 years, Jerry Insminger, his daughter Janie developed leukemia at age 7 and was dead by age 9. 17-year-old student at McClymonds High School dies. 2018, a 19-year-old McClymonds graduate who was on the football team died of osteosarcoma. I'm a little odd. I like to visit contaminated sites because I like to learn what's going on. I went to Nassau, New York, which is in the Hudson River Valley in New York. Someone had the idea of creating a dump site above a lake in Nassau, New York. Those chemicals went into the lake, contaminated the groundwater. I met a man there who worked on building roads in the area. His 16-year-old daughter complains of back pain one day, is diagnosed with osteosarcoma. She does not make it to graduation. In 2019, a fuel tank on the campus is removed, revealing TCE contamination. Trichloroethylene is contaminated right next to the school. February 2020, 5 active cleanup sites warranting a state response were discovered within 2,000 feet of the high school. All sites list trichloroethylene as a contaminant of concern. TCE was discovered in the groundwater and soil vapor beneath the school. So many of you know that radon, when it's been underneath your home, can evaporate and then come into your house and cause lung cancer, right? So many people in this room, how many people have had their home tested for radon at some point in time? And TCE can evaporate from contaminated groundwater and soil and enter people's homes, workplaces, or schools and cause cancer. or likely increase the risk of Parkinson's disease. In March 2020, the school was shut down. Do you guys didn't like make news? Shut down, right? Yeah, this is not like ancient, right? This is like shut down for testing. The pandemic prevents reopening until 2021. They report that TCE was not found in the indoor air of the school. Today, TCE remains in the groundwater and soil beneath the school. It's unclear how it's impacting students. Now, the contamination we know was present in 2020, but the production of it, the use of it began a generation earlier. So we don't know where I don't know where that contamination was. How long was it in the indoor air of the school before this? How did these two high school students develop a cancer that's linked to TCE if it wasn't in the indoor air of the school? So this is like, happening in your backyard and we're not even aware of it. And so I wasn't aware of this either, and we do this everywhere we go. It takes us like, a few hours to find this out. I think we've been duped. So when I was in medical school, I went to the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, the oldest medical school in the country, outstanding medical school, and I was taught when I was a student that it was almost impossible to make someone addicted to opioids if they were in pain. That's what I was taught. And I think we've been duped. We're in Silicon Valley. We were taught that social media was going to help children connect to their peers, but we now know that social media increases the risk of mental health problems, especially among teenage girls. We have a cancer-causing chemical that's been around for 100 years that we know causes cancer according to the EPA, according to the World Health Organization, according to the Department of Health and Human Services. This is actually the same chemical that the Secretary Robert Kennedy was trying to clean up in the Hudson River Valley when he was an environmental lawyer. And here it is near a school, and not one single person in this room knows about it. And it's 10 miles from where we are, and this has happened 3 miles from where we are. And it's been going on in the last 5 years, and we're allowing our children to die from it. We are allowing children to die from this because we're not making our voices heard and we're not opening our eyes. Susan Sontag in New York City says we need to be serious, we need to be passionate, and we need to wake up. How many people have children who went to this school? Anyone have children go to this school or grandchildren go to this school? It's predominantly black school. So this is a school serving black children. Woburn, Massachusetts is a very middle class community. I think it's predominantly white. Marines are among the most integrated portion of society, the best and brightest, and we're letting this happen. So in 2024, the EPA banned trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene. In 2025, that ban was frozen. The fate of that ban is uncertain to me, and that ban calls for these chemicals to be phased out over the next 10 years, but does not do anything to address the thousands of contaminated sites, including 1 mile from where we're sitting right now. So I'm going to go visit the school after here. So if anyone wants to show me around the school or direct me there, I'd love to see it. We have a responsibility to protect our children and our grandchildren, and we are failing to do so. And we wonder why 1 in 31 8-year-olds have autism. At the same time, every state but California sprays pesticides on kids' schools and playgrounds. Next slide. And the last one is air pollution. I think you guys all know that air pollution, major risk factor for brain diseases. There's a map of air pollution in 2006 from the United States, and on the right is a map of air pollution of the incidence of new cases of Parkinson's disease. You can see whether you think there's a relationship between air pollution and Parkinson's disease. And you can see that it's like right, Central Valley of California, Los Angeles, and the like. Next slide. I'm usually a very happy warrior. As my wife says, you gotta be a happy warrior. Don't get upset. You can't get upset, Ray. You can't get upset. So we'll be a happy warrior. So the book, we are full of hope. We tell these stories to motivate you. So in the book, we give you the Parkinson's prevention pyramid. So what are things that you can do to prevent your kids from ever getting Parkinson's disease? So we give you 3 different steps. And what can you do to possibly slow your rate of progression of the disease? If you're a smoker and you're diagnosed with lung cancer, the doctor's going to tell you to, beautiful. If you're go to the doctor and you're diagnosed with high blood pressure, the doctor's going to tell you to reduce your salt intake. If you go to the doctor and you're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, the doctor's going to tell you to stop eating sugar and exercise. So if you are diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, what should the doctor be telling you to do? Exercise and stop getting exposed to these chemicals. And stop getting exposed to these chemicals. Because if the chemicals are causing the disease, then the chemicals are likely can make the disease worse. So Dr. Beata Ritz, if there's the recurring theme here, these are a lot of women. Dr. Beata Ritz did a great study. She looked at people who already had Parkinson's disease, who were subsequently exposed to pesticides after they already had Parkinson's disease. Those individuals who were exposed to pesticides after they had Parkinson's disease had a faster rate of progression on nearly every measure of the disease that she looked at compared to people who were not exposed to pesticides. Researchers have shown that people who already have Parkinson's disease, who are exposed to high rates of air pollution, are more likely to be hospitalized for their Parkinson's disease. By the time you're diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, 60% of your nerve cells that produce dopamine have died off, right? You know this, yes? 60% died off. So you want to do everything in your power to protect the remaining 40%. Exercise releases growth factors in the brain that likely protect those remaining 40% of nerve cells. But we need to stop fueling the fire. We need to stop causing more misfolding of proteins. We need to eliminate the fire by taking 25 actions to reduce your exposure to these chemicals. Number 1 is to wash your produce, even your organic ones, because 20% of common foods that you buy and eat have residues of pesticides on them. In many cases, those pesticide levels are unsafe. When the Department of Agriculture assesses the safety of pesticide residue on an apple, they do so after that apple's been held under cold water for 15 to 20 seconds. Has anyone ever put their apple under cold water for 15 to 20 seconds? So if that's what the federal government is doing, think about what you should be doing, especially if you have Parkinson's disease. And so we give you 25 actions. If you don't like to read, you can skip ahead to page 237 of the book. We give you the Parkinson's 25. You can read the Reader's Digest version in about 15 minutes and give you 25 ways to reduce the risk. That's what that looks like. But I'll go back. Can we just go back one slide? So what can you do in your community? One, give the students the right to know. Shouldn't you know if a school in your community is contaminated with cancer-causing chemicals underneath it? Do you think that the contamination is solely only under that school? Do you think it might be under businesses in the area? Do you think it might be under homes in the area? Do you think you might actually go to the school for some events and prefer not to be breathing in cancer-causing chemicals, especially if you have Parkinson's disease? So you should have the right to know if you live near a contaminated site, and you should be informed every year or at some regular interval of that contamination. How many people know about Love Canal in New York City? So this is the most contaminated site in the country that led to a forced evacuation of the community because of this same chemical, along with others. People living in Love Canal today, which is a community in western New York near Niagara Falls, according to reporting from New York Times, don't even know about the history of it. I went to Love Canal. I told you I had to go visit. I'm a little odd, and I go visit the things. There's only one sign, a plaque, surrounded by 3 trees among baseball fields that puts the history of Love Canal in there. Otherwise, you would have no idea. There's actually a seesaw children's playground right next to a fence that has blocked off the area that's still contaminated with the chemicals. We can create pesticide-free schools. So how many people know about the Healthy Schools Act in California? So the Healthy Schools Act in California bans the use of most toxic pesticides on kids' schools and playgrounds, requires that parents be notified in writing in advance of use of pesticides on kids' schools and playgrounds, and encourages alternative means to do that. How did that come to be? That came to be because in 1999, Ms. Rubina Sewell dropped off her 5-year-old son at Sherman Oaks Elementary School. And when her kindergartner went outside the car, a man in a hazmat suit is spraying hedges with pesticides. Her child has an asthma attack in front of her, returns to the car saying, "Mommy, Mommy, is that ever going to happen again?" And she said, no. Because she said no, 2 years later, California has the Healthy Schools Act. So if that's what a mother of a child in Sherman Oaks Elementary School can do for the entire state, what can we do for Oakland? What can we do in terms of paraquat and getting rid of paraquat in California? Californians have repeatedly set the stage and been at the forefront of leading the country and, quite frankly, leading the world in terms of cleaning our environment. Why can't we do the same thing again so that we can create a world without Parkinson's disease, just like it has been for 299,800 years of its history? We can create organic golf courses. There's one organic golf course in the country. It's in Martha's Vineyard because the residents of Martha's Vineyard did not want its sole aquifer to be contaminated with pesticides. If you live near a golf course, can you contact the golf course and say, can you stop spraying chlorpyrifos if they find out if they're spraying chlorpyrifos? Stop doing that. The other pesticide widely sprayed on golf courses is something called 2,4-D. Anyone know what 2,4-D is? So 2,4-D is a component of Agent Orange that was sprayed over Vietnam, linked to Parkinson's disease. When he was a young man, the late General Colin Powell in 1963 is dumping a more concentrated form of Agent Orange called Agent Purple over the North Vietnamese. As some of you know, the late Colin Powell dies both with Parkinson's disease and multiple myeloma, both linked to Agent Orange. So we are spraying a component of Agent Orange, 2,4-D, routinely on golf courses across the United States. So you can contact your golf thing. Can we stop spraying chlorpyrifos and stop spraying 2,4-D? Can we use less toxic pesticides? Can we use less pesticides? Can we spray less frequently? And if I live there, can you do the courtesy of letting me know when you're going to spray so perhaps I can close my window, turn on my air purifier, and maybe disappear for the weekend? All very easy things to do, all within our power. And then what can we do globally? First thing is we need to measure Parkinson's. If you ask me how many people were diagnosed with Parkinson's last year, I could not actually give you an accurate answer. I can guess because the Parkinson's Foundation did a research study suggesting it's 90,000, which was 50% more than the previous estimates, but that's an estimate. If we want to manage a disease, we need to measure it, because once we measure it, we can manage it. And we can track it and see if we're making progress by getting rid of pesticides on schools, pesticides on golf courses, and decreased amount of pesticides on farms. We can see if we're making progress and track it. The absence of knowledge is only allowing other people to continue to use these toxic chemicals on us. And then we need to ban the most dangerous chemicals. And so the EPA administrator is Lee Zeldin. Former congressman from Long Island. Long Island is filled with sites contaminated with trichloroethylene. He himself, this is public information, survived leukemia. You can email the Administrator Zeldin, say, Administrator Zeldin, thank you very much for your service. Could you please ban paraquat? Can you please ban chlorpyrifos? Can we please ensure that the bans on trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene are put into place? His email is zeldin, zeldin.lee@epa.gov, and I'll give it to you again in a second. Well, we're here in Oakland. So we spend $15 billion of taxpayer monies on agricultural subsidies. 99% of those agricultural subsidies go towards conventional farming, which uses pesticides. Only 1% goes to organic farming. So when people say, why is organic so much more expensive than conventional farming? Maybe we should stop subsidizing conventional farming. And if we're going to subsidize anything, let's subsidize organic farming. The two crops that are sprayed with the most paraquat in the country are corn and soybeans. The two crops that receive the most amount of subsidies in the United States are corn and soybeans. We are subsidizing the use of a pesticide that in all likelihood causes Parkinson's disease and allowing the seeds of Parkinson's to do, and we're subsidizing it. We're subsidizing it on the front end for the use of pesticides, and we're subsidizing on the back end because Medicare is paying $25 billion to care for all of you with Parkinson's disease. The subsidies must end. Next slide. So here's the 25 suggestions to help reduce your risk of Parkinson's for your kids and grandkids and likely slow the rate of progression of disease. I already told you about washing your produce, eating your organic ones. I'll give you another one that's not really called out in the book, but I'm still learning. I call this a listening tour because I go around listening and learning about high schools that are contaminated with the chemical. When you eat a cow, you're not just eating a cow, but you're eating what the cow ate. Does that make sense? And so what's the cow's often eating is often eating pesticides. And some of those pesticides are fat-loving. So where's the cow going to put a fat-loving pesticide? You can't pee it out because, it's fat-loving. It's doesn't like water. So he puts it, or she puts it in milk. Puts it in the milk or the fat. So it turns out there are multiple studies that link high milk consumption to Parkinson's disease. There's a classic study in Hawaii that found a fat-loving pesticide called heptachlor. It's a cousin of DDT. They found it in the brains of high milk consumers in Hawaii where the pesticide was sprayed on feed that went to the cow. They found it in the brains of high milk consumers with Parkinson's disease in Hawaii. And so as any animal eats these fat-loving pesticides, they concentrate. The concentration gets magnified, gets increased as it makes its way up the food chain. So if you're, in addition to buying organic produce, you really, really want to buy organic, if you eat like meat or like dairy products like I do, organic meat and dairy products. And milk. Yes, milk, yes. We give you other ones: change your diet, Mediterranean diet, enjoy wine with pesticides. Next slide. No one's poisoning themselves. No one's spraying pesticides in their yard or inside their home. Yes, right? Dry clean cautiously. So California is the only state in the union that has banned perchloroethylene in dry cleaning, so kudos to California. But 49 states are still using perchloroethylene in dry cleaning. So dry clean cautiously. And then an air purifier, that would probably be something that almost everything we recommend in here is cost nothing or minimal cost. Some of this saves you money. The most expensive recommendation is to consider an air purifier, which I would strongly do if I were in Northern California. Next slide. And then, so that's all on the prevention part. We need to learn what's causing the disease because we want to cure it. But right now, we only spend 2 cents of every research dollar on trying to prevent the disease. 2 cents. There are homes in Northern California that will be sold for more money today than we spend as a society on trying to prevent Parkinson's. The economic cost of Parkinson's disease is about $50,000 per person with the disease. This is from a study from Michael J. Fox. So every person who has Parkinson's disease, the economic burden is $50,000, about $25,000 of that for Medicare and incremental healthcare costs, medications, doctor visits, physical therapy, surgical treatments, and about half of that from lost income. The great Dr. Jana Reed had to stop practicing medicine because of that. Because of it, she's had to pay out-of-pocket expenses for her medicines, caregiver time, and support. Together, it's $50,000 per person. There's 1 million people with Parkinson's in the United States. 50,000 times 1,000 is, did I get there? 1 million times 50,000 is 50 billion. $50 billion. So the economic cost is $50 billion. If we just prevent 1% of Parkinson's, $500 million savings per year to society. What's $500 million? That's double what the NIH spent on Parkinson's research in 2024. That's more than the Michael J. Fox Foundation, the largest funder of Parkinson's research in the world, spends on Parkinson's research annually. That's more than the global sales of Paraquat, not profit, sales of Paraquat. The United States would be better off if the US Treasury cut a check to the maker of Paraquat to have them stop spraying it on the fields in California in the United States. Next slide. So now I've gotten you fired up. So we need to amplify the voices of those affected. We're hanging out here in the Bay Area. HIV, which was first identified in New York City and then soon thereafter in San Francisco. The incidence of HIV, the number of new cases of HIV is falling. The number of cases is at its lowest level since 1990. My colleague, I worked at Johns Hopkins. The chair of neurology at Johns Hopkins is Dr. Justin MacArthur. His father has Parkinson's disease. He does HIV neurology, is his specialty. He says, Ray, I spoke to him just 2 weeks ago. He goes, Ray, I'm going out of business. Because HIV is falling so fast, treatments are so good that neurological complications of HIV are rapidly disappearing. Fantastic, right? There are people in this room who deserve applause because they helped make that happen. And there are organizations like ACT UP that was formed in 1987 with a motto of silence equals death. Because silence equaled death for people with HIV in the 1980s. 8 years after the HIV community found its voice, we had protease inhibitors that allowed people like Magic Johnson to live lives with near normal life expectancy. And it's now disappearing. HIV may disappear as a major clinical entity in our lifetime. For 299,900 years, there was no HIV. It's quite possible that we could make HIV disappear and put it back in the textbooks. What a great accomplishment. And that's because people like you who were threatened by HIV or deeply affected by HIV made their voices heard. What would happen if people like you made your voices heard about Parkinson's disease? Ali Signorelli is a great young woman who, like Jana Reed, was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease when she was young, I think in her 40s. She's a mother as well, and she says Parkinson's has got a PR problem, and so we need to address this with PR, public relations action, just like Candace Leitner did when her 13-year-old daughter was struck by a drunk driver while crossing the street in California. 4 days after her daughter dies, she's petitioning Governor Jerry Brown here in California every day for a year so that drinking and driving is made illegal in all 50 states. The drinking age is raised from 18 to 21. Blood alcohol levels drop to 0.08. 10,000 fewer children, 10,000 fewer families, schools, communities torn apart every year in the US alone because of Candace Leitner and MAD. What's 10,000? So I spent the first 10 years of my career working on Huntington's disease, a rare genetic disorder. I don't think I said the word environment a single time. Huntington's disease affects about 30,000 Americans. Because of Candace Leitner, every 3 years is equivalent to curing everyone with Huntington's disease. If we did that, you should be winning Nobel Prize after Nobel Prize after Nobel Prize for doing it. But because she did it even better, she prevented people from ever getting Huntington's disease or ever getting struck by a car in the first place. Most of us, like me, didn't even know that she existed. What a great gift. What a great gift ACT UP. What a great gift HIV activists here, probably in this room, as my guess is HIV met, and my guess is Mothers Against Drunk Driving may have met in this room before. So what can we do here today in this room to change the course of Parkinson's disease for all time and for all people? Next slide. And so you want better treatments, so chapters 8 and 9, Dr. Michael Oken, who's one of the world's experts in surgical treatments for Parkinson's disease, gives you one of the most promising treatments in the near term, including levodopa pumps, adaptive deep brain stimulation, the midterm, I think stem cells, and longer term gene editing. Next slide. As I think Sarah and as Jana mentioned, I joined a new organization called the Atria Health and Research Institute that's trying to move healthcare from reactive sick care. We spend 1 out of every 5 societal dollars on sickness care to proactive preventive care. And we created a Center for the Brain and the Environment in New York City that's focused on identifying the underlying environmental causes of brain diseases from autism to Alzheimer's disease so we can prevent them. So we can create a world where there aren't groups like PD Action addressing people with Parkinson's disease. It's just we're creating environments like this that are just serving people. And we're going to do that by helping measure chemicals in people's bodies, measuring chemicals in their environment, and investigating clusters of brain diseases throughout the country and perhaps around the world. If you want to help participate in our brain research, if you want to receive our newsletter, you can do so. It's all free to do so, no obligation. You can stop at any time. There's a sign-up sheet in the back. Or next slide, since we're in Silicon Valley, you can scan the QR code and do the same. So what can we do right now to change the course of Parkinson's disease for subsequent generations? How many people know about the PD Avengers? Thank you. A global grassroots organizations founded by and led by people with Parkinson's disease. I think all of them might have had young onset Parkinson's disease. I don't think any of them carry a genetic risk factor for the disease. You can join PD Avengers. It's pdavengers.com. It's free to do so. They have 10,000 members. You can do it right now. It'll take you 30 seconds to do so. Your children can do it, your friends, your neighbors, your nieces, your nephews, your cousins. I am sure they'll let even your pet join up to be a PD Avenger. You can sign up for our brain registry right in the back, or you can scan our QR code and you can read our book. I think we have free copies right here, and I'm happy to sign them at the end. And you can tell a friend or 10 about it. We've sold 40,000 copies of the book. That means 4% of Americans with Parkinson's disease have heard about the book. So I visited, I think, 30 cities in 15 countries and in 15 states and in 2 countries. But that means that only a few thousand people are hearing the message that I'm telling you here, that they don't know that there's a school in their community that's contaminated with trichloroethylene and children are getting leukemia and osteosarcoma. Diseases have causes. That's a central principle of Western medicine. Diseases have causes. When you get diagnosed with disease, you need to find out what its cause is so other people don't get it, so your progression is slowed, and so we get more effective treatments. What can you do in your community? You already have a great advocate, Rubina Sewell, who got rid of pesticides on your kids' schools and playgrounds. Pay it forward. Let's get rid of toxic pesticides on golf courses in your community. And then you can contact the EPA administrator, Lee Zeldin, zeldin.lee@epa.gov, and ask him to ban paraquat, chlorpyrifos, and and ensure that the bans on trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene are put into place. If 1 million people email the administrator, Lee Zeldin, he's likely to act. In fact, it might already be working. Next slide. It turns out just 2 weeks ago, the EPA tweeted out that EPA will reassess the safety of paraquat. Now, what that scope is, whether this actually is put into action, we need to see. But if you hold your politicians' feet to the fire, they will react. We are here in Northern California. This is the heart of activism in the United States. If Californians don't make their voices heard, then who is? The challenge of our time is to address this plague of brain diseases. Brain diseases are now the world's leading source of disability. For the 300,000 year of history of humanity, that has never been the case. It has never been the case that brain diseases were the leading sources of disability. 1 in 3 children, 31 children having autism is unnatural. That ALS and brain cancer are increasingly common is unnatural. That Parkinson's disease is one of the world's fastest growing brain diseases is unnatural. That 1 in 3 85-year-olds in the United States will develop Alzheimer's disease is unnatural. These are all likely driven in large part by chemicals in our food, water, and air. It is our job, it's our duty, it's our responsibility to stop these chemicals so we create a world where fewer people are suffering like you are. Thank you very much.
Can you go back one screen, please?
Where do you want to be?
I think most of you noticed there was a golf course that we drove by on the way in. I think maybe that's a good place to start this fight here. But you know, it's interesting because I've had these conversations before with people in politics and even the golf courses where you call up and you want to know a simple question. Do you spray this on your golf course? And a lot of times people just don't know the answer or won't give you the answer. So, I mean, what's the secret to sort of actually just drilling down and getting the information that you need?
Well, I mean, so Jana alluded to the fact that I asked her and Sarah, can you send me a list of all the bases that you served at and all the years that you served at them? They sent me the list. It's in the end of chapter 4 of the book. And I just did a search on the internet, and it turns out that over half the bases that you served at and half the bases that Sarah served at were contaminated with trichloroethylene. And that's what I think caused the disease for Jana and Sarah.
Yeah, it seems you really just have to be persistent. The information is out there. You just have to be persistent to get the information and to
You guys we're in Northern California. This is what you guys do.
right.
I mean, I'm not telling you anything new. I'm just saying do what you do and what you have done and do it again and again and again so we create a healthier, safer world for all of us and for all generations to come.
Yeah. Well, actually, we're going to turn now to Dr. Reed. Can you tell us a little bit about your history and the environmental exposures that might have contributed to your disease?
Sure. So again, I grew up in Central Coast of California, and actually my mom's from Los Angeles. So I think my earliest exposures were really in the air. My dad is a pilot. We used to fly his plane down to LA, and I remember as a kid flying into the Los Angeles basin, and there's this big, thick rind of like black, dark brown black smog. Thank you. And then growing up, I ran in high school, and every time we'd go to Los Angeles for meet, like I remember my lungs would burn for like 24 hours afterwards. And this is not living there full time. This is going to visit my grandparents a lot of sports activities. But we lived on a well growing up, and we have tested our well, and it's as far as I know, hasn't had anything. But specifically with the military, we've, as military folks, have been exposed to a lot of different things. We've talked about airplanes, degreasers, so depending on what your job is, especially in the military, lots of touch with TCE. One of the other things that I deployed a lot, and one of the other exposures that likely is contributed is burn pits. For those of you that do or don't know, basically in Afghanistan and Iraq, a lot of other places, there aren't incinerators. So anything that needs to be burned or thrown away, they just make a heap in the corner of the base, and they keep it burning 24/7, and everything goes in there. And I mean everything: human waste, animal waste. styrofoam, metal, plastic, anything you could think of. So I remember I would run around the base. The base for me was a 3-mile loop, and I'd run around it once every day and 3 times every Friday. And I remember the smell was so bad, I had to literally hold my breath as I ran around it. And at the time, I remember thinking, oh, that's gross, but I didn't stop to think about, I really just shouldn't do this. For me, I was like, I'm doing such a good job. I'm staying active, I'm staying fit, I need to make it through this deployment. And instead I was hurting myself, which is interesting. One other potential exposure is vaccines. We all get lots of vaccines in the military, we get lots more. So even for example, I've had 7 or 8 anthrax vaccines. And what potential additive was in there that could have caused all this? So what we know is that it's not one exposure, it's a lifetime of repeated exposures. And so at some point, I had too much. And in addition to exposures, lifestyle. And I've learned a lot about lifestyle. Physician in the military. I used to pride myself on night shift. I was a night shifter by choice. I loved it. But then I also was always so proud of myself that I could get 3 or 4 hours of sleep and I'd be fine. And I used to push the envelope. You get on a path and you don't get off. And so that looking back, I was too stubborn and I wasn't willing to see that I could have done things a different way. And that's what I'm learning now.
Thank you for sharing your story. It's interesting because you said that, the lifetime of exposures. Okay. You mentioned a lifetime of exposures, and I think that's one of the really tricky things about Parkinson's is that we all know that, the common thinking is that it could, started 20 years ago. And so in terms of environmental exposures, Dr. Dorsey, how does one put the pieces together when it could, your exposures could have been over 20 years? I think a lot of people get diagnosed and they think, what was I exposed to? How did this happen?
Yeah, I think it's really hard, and it's part of the challenge. But we have, cigarettes causing, you get lung cancer at 60, not because you started smoking at 58 or 48 or 38. You likely get lung cancer at 60 because you started smoking when you're 20. And we know that the seeds of Parkinson's disease, very likely, the seeds of Parkinson's are planted early. I think the seeds of Alzheimer's disease are planted early. The seeds of these diseases are planted early. You were how old when you served at these bases that were contaminated?
I was in Afghanistan in 2009 and 2010, but then I had deployed before that as well.
And deployed before that. Yeah. We know from Camp Lejeune that the Marines who served there were 20. Some were teenagers. Some of you know Brian Grant, the former NBA basketball player. He was a 3-year-old boy when his father, a Marine, was stationed at Camp Lejeune. His father dies of esophageal cancer linked to trichloroethylene. His younger brother nearly dies while on the base and then miraculously gets better after they move. And then 33 years after he was living on the base, he's diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. We know from studies of air pollution in Mexico City that you can see the pathology of Parkinson's disease in children who died prematurely as young as 11 months of age. As young as 11 months of age, you can see the seeds, the pathology, the misfolding of the protein in Alzheimer's beta amyloid as young as 11 months of age. And in 20% of the 203 children that Dr. Lillian Calderon Garcia-Duenas, another woman, evaluated, 20% of them had Parkinson's pathology between ages 11 and age 40. Obviously, none of them had the disease, none of them were showing the symptoms, but you can see the pathological hallmarks. The seeds of these diseases are planted early. I was speaking to a woman earlier today who, as a teenager, worked on farms in New Jersey, harvesting tomatoes and getting exposed to pesticides, and then worked for a company that was likely, an industry that was likely using trichloroethylene in her 20s. The seeds of this disease are planted early. It takes years or decades for the disease to spread from the nose or the gut, make its way back to the brain. It takes years for the 60% of the nerve cells to die off for you to produce the symptoms. Seeds are planted early, and you're going to take action to stop fueling the fire. If you're a smoker with lung cancer, you're going to stop smoking. If you have high blood pressure, you're going to decrease your salt intake. If you have diabetes, you're going to decrease your sugar intake. If you have Parkinson's disease, you're going to decrease your exposure to these toxic chemicals.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So really, I think what we need to do is, like, the more you hear about this and the more you look into your own history, then you need to tell people. I mean, this is just something that we need to become so impassioned about, that we will look 20 years ago, what was I doing? You know, what were my exposures? And then tell other people, hey, you know, do this. And that's the only way this is going to work.
That's part of the amplifying your voice.
Yeah.
Remember, PLAN.
Prevent, learn why, amplify,
amplify,
navigate.
And navigate. Great. And one of the things I love about the book is how you really do sort of lay out the 25 plans. You make it really simple and really clear. Okay, if you do nothing else, you know, stop, you know, wash your produce and stop going to the dry cleaning. And I mean, it's very simple. It's very, and what also strikes me is that these 25 things are sort of applicable to everything in life. I mean, so many of the chronic diseases are caused by these sort of constant hits that we take. And, you know, it improves your overall quality of life to follow the 25 things that you outline. But what would you say are maybe the top 5 if someone had to sort of focus on?
I think it depends on who you are and where you live. Obviously, if you're a worker getting exposed to these chemicals, you know, being protected might be number 1. If you live in Northern California or Southern California, an air purifier would have to be at the top. Anyone drink water from a well? How many people drink water from a well growing up? So just hold those hands up. Hold them up, hold them up, hold them up, hold them up. All right, so is it terribly surprising that well water drinking is 75% increased risk of Parkinson's? And so wells are often in rural areas, often near farms. Farms often use pesticides. Pesticides can contaminate the groundwater. Wells can be shallow. They can be contaminated with the drinking water. They're not regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act, so they're infrequently tested. And usually when they're tested, when a property is bought or sold, for example, they're usually just tested for bacteria or maybe nitrates. And so they're rarely tested for pesticides or industrial chemicals like trichloroethylene. So if you have a well, you're going to get on your way home. You're going to get a carbon filter, like, you know, from the grocery store. Put it on your faucet, so you decrease your exposure to these chemicals, and then you can get your water tested for these chemicals. If you have a well, a reverse osmosis system might be beneficial as well. So I think it depends on it. But California, I would be looking at air purifier, and then I get increasingly concerned about pesticides that get concentrated as they make their way up their food chain. So if I were going to buy something organic, I would buy dairy and meat organic.
Yes, I mean, speaking of dairy and meat, a lot of people, there's a lot of talk about the gut microbiome. Do you have any thoughts on that?
You guys want a little science? All right, so in 2003, so we thought Parkinson's disease, Dr. Parkinson, who wrote the thing, he thought it was a brain disease, and he looked forward to future scientists who were going to figure out the causes of the disease. In 2003, a really smart German pathologist who's still living, his name's Heiko Brock, he said that Parkinson's disease does not begin in the brain. Parkinson's disease does not begin in the brain. Parkinson's disease does not begin in the brain. Well, then where does it begin? He says the first place I see the pathology is in the smell center right behind our nose, and the other place I see it is at the base of our brain, the brain stem, in nerves that form the nerve called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve goes from the lower part of your brain all the way to your gut. So in someone like me, it might be 3 feet long. And he thought that the pathology of Parkinson's disease might begin in the gut and then spread upwards like a fall of a row of dominoes. And as those dominoes fall, new symptoms develop. So one of the earliest features of the disease for some people is constipation, because if you damage the nerve that goes to the gut, your digestion might be slowed, you might get constipated. Then it might spread upward to part of the brain called the pons, which is responsible for regulating our sleep. So some of you might have early sleep disturbances and act out your dreams, for example, before you get the tremor. That's one domino falling. And then another domino falls because it spreads from the pons to the part of the brain called the substantia nigra that controls our movement. Once it gets there, then you can get the tremor and slowness of movement. Does that all make sense? So that's one form. In 2019, my friend and really smart guy at Per Borghammer in Denmark said there are two forms of Parkinson's disease. There is this gut or body first form of the disease where the disease spreads upwards. And he says, but most people with Parkinson's disease, a lot of people with dementia with Lewy bodies have that form, but most people with Parkinson's disease have a form that begins in the nose. He calls that a brain first form of the disease. And that the pathology begins with misfolding in our smell center called the olfactory bulb, smell center, and then it spreads backwards to a part of the brain called the amygdala that's important for emotions and anxiety. And then from there, just one stop, so it's like you're going from Oakland to Chicago to New York, this next stop is the substantia nigra. So these individuals might have early loss of smell, then they might have a little depression and anxiety, and then they have the features of Parkinson's disease, tremor. In those cases, because the disease usually begins in one single spot, most of the disease is unilateral, so people are much more affected on one side of their body, either the right or left side of the body. And then only later in the course of the disease do they get sleep disturbances, later do they get constipation, and only much later do they get memory difficulties. So two forms of the disease, one a body or gut first form of the disease that begins in the gut and spreads upwards. A second, a nose or brain first form of the disease that spreads in the nose and spreads backwards. Chemicals that we ingest might predispose us to getting a gut first form of the disease. Chemicals that we inhale might predispose us to getting a nose first form of the disease.
Wonderful explanation. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I wanted to ask a question about genetics. I know you spoke a little bit about that in your talk, and it's fascinating to know that only 13% of Parkinson's is attributed to the genes, which means that 87% is attributed to the environment. I know in like cancer epidemiology, we talk about sort of a two-hit hypothesis, where you could have the gene, and some people never develop Parkinson's, but maybe the environment is a trigger that sort of, brings out the gene. Does that apply to neurodegenerative diseases?
Yeah, so I've simplified everything quite a bit. I think we all realize I've simplified things. So it turns out to be more complicated. So not every member of the Air Force Academy, not every Marine who served at Camp Lejeune, not every farmer exposed to paraquat develops Parkinson's disease. In fact, only a small minority of, even though veterans bear a disproportionate burden of the disease, only a small portion of veterans develop Parkinson's disease, only a small portion of farmers develop it. Only about 10% of smokers get lung cancer. Not everyone exposed to asbestos gets mesothelioma, not everyone exposed to benzene gets cancer. So what are the other factors? Among the other factors are interactions with genes. Just like you and I differ in our breakdown of a drug, you might break it down a drug much faster than I do. There are genetic differences in the way that people metabolize pesticides. These won't show up as genetic causes or risk factors of the disease. These are just genetic differences that we have for whatever reason. Humans, species need to have lots of genetic variation for us to all survive. If we all have the same genes, we might be all susceptible to the same disease. We all perish, not so good for species. So we have genetic variability, and some of these variabilities might explain why some people exposed to the pesticide gets the disease and why some don't. Can I read a question that's right on this? I can't read anymore. And so this is, says, my husband that I met earlier, he carries a GBA mutation. So this is the most common genetic risk factor for the disease, and that he has Parkinson's disease. What he didn't mention is that he was a cotton farmer for 15 to 20 years, and that, so what pesticide is sprayed on cotton? And that 3 men in our community got Parkinson's disease. Remember, that's not planted. And 1 woman got ALS, wow. And that also 3 kids got cancer, 1 with leukemia who later died of a brain tumor at age 34, and 2 kids got Burkitt's lymphoma, including our son. We had well water and other adults who got cancer. So it turns out that GBA mutation, Dr. Caroline Tanner and her colleagues, Dr. Ethan Brown, showed that people who carry this GBA mutation who are exposed to pesticides have a much heightened risk of developing the disease. And so there's even suggestion, my colleague looking at LRRK2 mutations, remember the most common genetic cause of the disease, lifetime risk about 30 to 40%, who are exposed to other chemicals like trichloroethylene might be at heightened risk. It turns out that in many cases, the environmental causes of the disease mimic the effects of the genetic forms of the disease. So LRRK2 carriers, LRRK2 is just the name of a gene, LRRK2, just like the name of the gene. Genes encode for proteins that give instructions to proteins which carry out the function. Scientists aren't very original, so they called the gene that LRRK2 encodes for the LRRK2 protein. And so it turns out LRRK2 mutations increase the activity of this LRRK2 protein. Trichloroethylene also increases the activity of that LRRK2 protein. So the chemical is mimicking the most common environmental cause, most common genetic cause of the disease. And you can imagine that if you have two things acting on the same thing, you might get a heightened risk of developing the disease. Does that make sense?
I don't think I mentioned, but I have the GBA mutation. My mom's sister and my mom's father also had Parkinson's. So
Did you do the genetic test?
I did PD generation. Yeah, I was one of the first people. It was like 5 years ago. So
That's the Parkinson's Foundation genetic test that Dr. Dorsey mentioned. If you want more information on that, I think that Helena can talk to you in the back about it. It's free, and they do counseling as well.
yeah, I'd really recommend it, especially if you have other family members with Parkinson's. And it gives it, for me, it gave a way that I could also break into communication with my family about it, my kids, you know, knowing kind of helped me guide what to say and then what not to go into. So.
And then did your kids, do they embrace this? Do they read about, have they read the book? Are they changing their lives to try to maybe change the course of I'm just curious.
They're teenagers.
Perfect answer.
The seeds are planted early. The seeds are planted early, Dr. Reed.
Perfect answer. Well, that is one question that has come up on a couple of the cards that came in is about, you know, the book is about how to sort of prevent Parkinson's. But a lot of people in the audience, you know, have Parkinson's already or have loved ones that have Parkinson's. So do the same things in the book apply to slowing the progression of the disease down? I mean, you did allude to this into your talk, but is there any evidence that shows that that's actually the case?
Yeah, so I didn't think about this really until the last couple years. And there is evidence. I told you the study from people with Parkinson's who are exposed to pesticides have faster rate of progression. People with Parkinson's who are exposed to air pollution are more likely to be hospitalized for their condition. We know this from almost every other chronic disease. People who smoke, with lung cancer who smoke have a faster rate of progression. People who have high blood pressure who go on a low salt diet, they can sometimes come off their blood pressure medications. There are people who can come off insulin for type 2 diabetes through diet and exercise. There are people in this room who are in better physical shape with their Parkinson's disease than they were before. Janet's friend, Sarah Whittingham, after she got diagnosed with Parkinson's, ran an Ironman triathlon, and Janet was there to meet her with the American flag that flew over their base in Afghanistan. So we know that the course of this disease is modifiable. We know that the rate of progression is variable. I think one of the big factors, one of the factors in determining what determines the rate of progression is some people are still getting exposed to the chemical. They're still near the golf course. They're still drinking the well water. They're still farming. They're still working with the decreasing chemicals. And some people have stopped getting exposed to the disease. I was just thinking about this earlier. I told you that it might begin in the gut. Let's just do the gut because it's easy. If it began early and with well water, if you stop it, you are not sending any more misfolded protein up to the brain. What a nice thing. Maybe I can't undo the damage that's been done. Exercise might protect the remaining nerve cells, but if I stop sending misfolding proteins up to the brain, how can that not be beneficial for me?
Thank you. Did you want to read the question?
I did.
Oh, you read the question already? Okay, great. So let's see, where was I? So when you talk about amplifying, you know, there's sort of, in my mind, there's sort of two aspects of that. One is sort of, you know, being an advocate, like you said, and making change, calling people and changing policies and things like that around pesticides. And then there's also just sort of self-advocacy. And you talk about the patient as the sun in the Parkinson's universe. And so could you talk a little bit about, you know, how the importance of people advocating for themselves, particularly in the healthcare setting. And I'd also like to ask Dr. Reed too about, what's your best advice to people on sort of how to advocate for themselves.
Well, you should talk. I mean, you and Sarah, you can tell about what you guys are doing for veterans.
So my colleague Sarah and I have really tried to push the Veterans Administration to recognize Parkinson's and to recognize deployments and some of the chemicals that we've been exposed to as causes. So it's like in Vietnam, we had Agent Orange, and it's now recognized that Agent Orange can cause disease, so it's presumptive. It's determined now if you were stationed anywhere near Vietnam, and they have certain other coordinates, that if you have Parkinson's, it's a presumptive cause. Not the only probably cause, but a presumptive cause. So we don't have that yet for our current veterans. OEF, Iraq, Afghanistan, we've had exposures, like I said, burn pits. Burn pits may be the Agent Orange, of our current deployments in our current day. So we've tried to push the VA to acknowledge our exposures and not wait 20 years like what happened with Agent Orange. Because there is this lag, and the laws with the VA, they do not allow this presumptive diagnosis. So if you come 15 years later, they're going to say, well, you can't prove it. So we've tried really hard to push that through, and we're still working on it. I was still in the Air National Guard, an active guardsman when I was diagnosed. So I was given 100% VA disability from the first time I submitted my paperwork. Sarah had to resubmit 5 times. So she submitted 5 times, had to get a lawyer, and she now has her VA 100%, which sounds like a badge of honor, but it's not, but it's better. It's better because it does provide us medical care and some other benefits for our kids with school and things. But that's what we're going to keep doing. We're going to keep trying to advocate for our veterans, because if we don't, who's going to? So.
And just on this, so Agent Orange, you mentioned, is a presumptive diagnosis if you served in the military, I think, for more than 30 days in Vietnam, in regions where Agent Orange was sprayed, and you develop Parkinson's. You don't have, it's considered presumptive.
You don't have to prove it. You don't have to prove that you had something. Just by being there for 30 days, they're saying that's enough. That's actually what happened in Camp Lejeune. There's called the PACT Act, and they've recently expanded the number of presumptive diagnoses. So it's a lot of cancers, and it's a lot of respiratory issues. And so if you have those issues and you develop Parkinson's, you don't have to prove the link, the nexus. They do that for you. So that's what we're trying to get for Parkinson's.
And politicians matter. So one of my good friends I've been very fortunate to meet is Senator Tom Daschle, I think, who served in the Army. And he, as a congressman in the 1980s, introduced legislation that allowed veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange to get benefits. Some of you remember he was a former Senate Majority Leader. And the burn pits thing is also, there's a civilian counterpart to that, and that's the first responders from 9/11 in New York City, who research has shown have an increased risk for dementia. Air pollution is bad for the brain. And I was just recently connected to a couple people who now have Parkinson's disease. So this can all change, and people like Sarah and Jana who are going to help drive that change.
Yeah, that's great. What about in the doctor's office? Is there any recommendations you have for, if there's one thing that you could say that people could do to improve care for people with Parkinson's?
Yeah, so care makes a huge difference. I've been doing this listening tour, and I was in Dallas, Texas, and off the freeway in a strip mall in Dallas, Texas is a big building, and it says Parkinson's Voice Project. Anyone do the Parkinson's Voice Project? Yes, so Parkinson's Voice Project. So it's founded by a woman, Samantha, who's a speech therapist, and her goal is that no one with Parkinson's disease gets a feeding tube, and no one with Parkinson's disease gets aspiration pneumonia from swallowing their own saliva. No feeding tubes for people with Parkinson's disease, no aspiration pneumonia. And she does that by doing speech therapy, including online classes that allow anyone in the world to join. How many people join her online classes? And you can join, how much does it cost? $0. and about 5,000 people per session join. I did the math, that works out to over 1 million people a year. Their entire budget is $4 million. That means less than $4 per speech therapy session. And she's doing it in person. She had voice recordings of all the people that she sees in person from 10 years ago, speaking like this, I have Parkinson's disease. And then they had them speaking now, and they were as loud as I am, or louder. And so I think if you get the care, it's really hard to get the care, but a lot of these care things are out there. There's this for speech therapy, there's dance for Parkinson's, there's Rocksteady boxing, there's Synapticure, which I'm a small part of. Lots and lots of things that are out there, and some of these things are free, some are really low cost, and some are on the more costly side. But even if you can't get your care where you live, you know, you're in Fresno, California, where I'm going on Saturday, there are ways to have care come to you regardless of who you are or where you live.
Yeah, the popularity of telehealth, you know, I guess is one of the silver linings of the pandemic, has really helped improve care, especially in rural areas. I think it's really important. And I know that you're going to Fresno after this.
Saturday. Tomorrow's San
Which
Francisco.
is wonderful, because as we all know, in the Central Valley, there's a lot of pesticide exposures, and I think it's really fabulous that you're going to go reach that community and talk to them. So we only have a few more minutes, so I just wanted to wrap up with a couple questions. And one is about just how, you know, the last slides that you have are on funding for research. What can we do to increase funding and make this a national priority? I don't know what the status currently is of the National Parkinson's Act, but could you speak a little bit about what we can do to advance research?
Yes, so the National Parkinson's Act requires the federal government to develop a federal plan to prevent, slow, treat, and cure Parkinson's disease. Before the act was passed, there is no federal plan to do that. It was sponsored by Congressman Gus Bilirakis, Republican from Florida, whose brother died from Parkinson's, whose father has Parkinson's, who represents a district that has a contaminated site with TCE, and Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton, Democrat from Virginia, who has a rare Parkinsonian disorder called PSP that prevented her from running for re-election. That passed the House 407-9 and unanimously passed the Senate. Seems like there's lots of bipartisan, nonpartisan interest in preventing, slowing, and treating Parkinson's disease. We've had Democratic congressmen serve with Parkinson's. We've had Republican senators serve with Parkinson's disease. We've had members of the cabinet serve with Parkinson's disease. I think politicians are very, very, very aware, in part because of their age, of Parkinson's disease. We are not pushing our representatives nearly hard enough to do it. Senator Shelley Moore Capito was the chief Senate sponsor of the National Plan to End Parkinson's Act. She's from West Virginia. I asked why did she care about Parkinson's disease? Why do you think anyone have a thought of why Senator from Capito from West Virginia cares about Parkinson's disease? Relative. So I thought relative. No relative. Coal mining? No. She cares about it because a constituent asked her to do so. That constituent is a political operative from the opposite party. So she has introduced, she's trying to increase the NIH funding for Parkinson's research from $250 million to $600 million. Most people in this room didn't know that. I didn't know that. If she's trying to do this simply because a constituent who's a political operative from the opposite party is doing that, then what are we asking our legislators to do? What are we asking our representatives to do locally, at the state level, and our national level? And can I do one last thought?
Yeah.
So I see all these representatives of all the religions, and so there are certain things that bind all religions together. And one is the golden rule that we should do unto others as we want to do unto us, and that we are our neighbor's keeper. And so I am still disturbed by this high school. This is our neighbor. This is our neighbor that we are not caring for, that we are not acting, that we are not giving voice to the children, and they're suffering from it. Their families are suffering for it. I've never lost a child. I have 4 children, but I am quite certain that if I lost a child, there wouldn't be a day that wouldn't go by where I didn't think about it. We have an obligation to care for our neighbors, and we're failing to do so.
Yes, I agree. Thank you for bringing that up. I think if anybody's feeling especially motivated to work on a local level on some advocacy stuff, please reach out to PD Active. You can. I think there are several of us who are interested in doing more. So, what about on a more sort of to end on an inspirational note? Is there anything in the research pipeline or the treatment pipeline that particularly inspires you, Dr. Reed?
I'm actually in the process of changing my medication. I've been on immediate release Cinemet and extended at night, and I've been having worsening symptoms and having to take extra meds and early and late and all that. So I'm switching to a longer term pill like either Rytary or Crexont. But I know there's some people that have had like the continual
The pump?
yeah. So I think anything that can make your life better, any new formulation, and pills, medication, there's a lot of them out there, but just I've personally had a hard time managing my schedule and my protein intake, and I've had a lot of variable results. So for me, anything to make that easier is better. But ultimately, stem cells or something that can replace or help replace what's in our brain and make the folding of these abnormal proteins stop. Something from a cellular level is always going to be better.
So the levodopa pump, I think, can be a potential major benefit for people, just like an insulin pump. In the old days, if you had diabetes, you had to prick yourself and you had to dose yourself with insulin based on a blood sugar level. Wouldn't it be great now that we can have a levodopa pump that can give you continuous levodopa so you don't get the fluctuations? Maybe it does it at night. Maybe we can get that pump to measure our activity, or maybe hook up to a wristwatch and measure our tremor, and then maybe it can dose itself, just like we have continuous glucose monitors that monitor glucose.
Exactly.
Why can't we do the same thing
Exactly.
for Parkinson's disease? You need to make your voices heard if you want this to happen. It just doesn't happen in a vacuum. But there's a parable of the river. Can I tell you about the parable of the river? Do anyone know the parable of the river? He knows everything. So there's these children coming down a river, and they're sick. And this town, takes the child out of the river and cares for it. And then more and more children keep coming down the river, and more people in the community are taking care for it. They get really, really good at caring for all these children who are coming down the river who are sick. They're doing such a good job that the local priests bless them for the work that they're doing. And then one person in the community who's been caring for these children has said he's had enough, and he does something different. He stops caring for the people who are coming down the river, and he goes upstream to find out why the children are there. We have a pandemic of Parkinson's disease. All of you, many of you suffer from it. All of you have friends and family members with it. The first response to any crisis is to contain it. If there's a fire going on in a church, you close the doors to make sure it doesn't spread. If there's an infectious pandemic, you quarantine individuals so the disease does not spread. We have failed to contain Parkinson's disease. We have let paraquat, which 70 other countries have found the will to ban, to be used increasing amounts on our neighbors here in Northern California. We're allowing dry cleaning chemicals and degreasing chemicals contaminate our schools, our homes, our water, our workplaces. We need to go upstream, find out what the root causes of this disease are, so we can create a world where the vast majority of humanity has been free of Parkinson's disease or extraordinarily rare cases of Parkinson's disease. We need to do that again by going upstream.
Thank you. I think it's time to all go upstream. So on that note, I think we're going to have a book signing. If anybody has a book that they want to have signed, please come up to the front. We're going to do that, and we'll have a line going. Dr. Dorsey will be here to sign books. And thank you all for coming. Really appreciate the big turnout today.
Good
Y'all set up.
Oh, you can sign. Jana can sign.